screens are bad, screens are terrible, and any parent who puts their kid in front of a screen should lose that kid. Does educational screen time help your child learn how to read? When I say educational screen time, I mean learning games, learning activities. This could be Reading A to Z, it could be ABC Mouse, it could be YouTube Kids or PBS for Kids, any of those sort of things. Are these actually helping your child learn anything, and specifically learn how to read? Now, I know half of you are watching this video and you are waiting for me to say screens are bad, screens are terrible, and any parent who puts their kid in front of a screen should lose that kid, right? That's what you want to hear me say. You want confirmation that what you're doing with your kid is right. I know another half of folks are listening, waiting for me to say, yeah, these things work. They're great because your kid is starting to sing these songs, you're starting to learn these things. You want to hear me say, like, you are doing an amazing job as a parent. And I'm not going to say it either way because the answer isn't that simple. And if you're looking for like research, like hard research, there is plenty of research that I can cite on how screens are harmful for kids. We know this, it's true. Before the age of 2, we already know that this is kind of bad for kids, but there's going to be more research that comes out in the future that says, okay, screens might be a little bit harmful for kids in their development. We know that. This is not going to be a research video, okay? This is going to be common sense. If you need research for the claims that I'm going to make in this video, I would recommend that you go online, find some research, pull some stuff. I'm not going to do it here. We're going to talk about common sense. What is happening in your kid's head when you put them in front of a screen? And is that trade-off worth it for their reading ability? Because it certainly is a trade-off. So let's talk about what happens in your kid's head when you put a learning app, a tablet, a phone, a game in front of them to teach them how to read, okay? Number 1. Your kid is getting a ton of stimulation. They're getting sound stimulation. They're also getting a lot of visual stimulation. A book that you might show a kid might be black and white. There might be some pictures. It's definitely not going to light up. It's definitely not going to move. It's definitely not going to be interactive and you'll touch it and you'll change. The screen will. So when your kid interacts with the screen, regardless of what the screen is, what the game is, what the activity is, the first thing that's happening in your kid's brain is, this is fun. I like this. Psychologically, there's a lot of stuff happening with the colors, with how quickly the scenes shift. People spend a lot of money learning what keeps kids' attention, and they put all of that money into the screen, okay? Number 1, it is going to catch their interest. It's going to give them a lot of stimulation, okay? You're like, okay, good. The stimulation is great because it's going to keep them on the learning. Maybe. Number 2, they are very likely going to get bad teaching. Bad teaching. It might be fun, but fun is different than learning. Learning is what happens when you learn, okay, this is the number 5. I can see the number 5. I can count the number 5. I can recognize the number 5 out of context. I know the number 5. That's different than fun, than being able to sing about the number 5, to be able to sing a counting song by 5s. It's different than being able to see, oh, this is 5 and it's gonna jump up and down and I'm gonna hit it with my finger and it's gonna explode, right? That's different than learning. Yes, there is overlap. No, it is not the same thing. And most of the apps, the games, the programs that you are putting in front of your kid are not good at teaching. In fact, very stimulating, not great at teaching. Number 3, but they are still getting exposure, okay? They're still getting exposure, so you gotta look at this trade-off. It's gonna be super stimulating, they're gonna wanna focus on it. It's not gonna be the best instruction, it's probably gonna be a lot of songs that your kid likes to sing, but they're not actually holding on to much. But at minimum, at least these educational apps and games are giving your kid initial exposure to the topic. It might get them interested in numbers. It might get them interested in colors or shapes. It might provide you as the parent an opportunity to talk about these things, to engage your kid in conversation, to start talking to them about reading, and maybe to start teaching them outside of that screen. So there is some positive to it too. And number 4, this is not what's happening in your kid's brain, but this is what's happening for you as a family, you as a parent, is giving you some time. When you put kids in front of screens, generally they stop, they freeze, and they look. And if that's the time that you need as a parent to calm down, to rest, to recharge, to be able to teach them outside of that time, then that might be an option you want to consider. Don't assume it's going to teach it for you, but that educational screen time, that might actually be helpful for you as the parent, okay? So you're starting to see, as I go through this list, it's not all black and white. It's not all bad. It's not all good. There's both things to factor in, okay? Now, if all that's happening in your child's brain, what happens when you try and teach them without the screen? If they're used to screens, what happens when you take the screen away? Now, I will tell you, you can trust me, you cannot trust me. Doesn't matter. I'm going to tell you the truth. Children who are used to a lot of screens tend to struggle with their behavior when the screen gets taken away. This shows up in a lot of different ways in a classroom, but one of the hallmark signs of this is if you walk in a classroom and you see a child who is generally really fidgety, really active, moving around a lot, having a little bit of a hard time controlling their body, right? Kids are generally active, but you can walk in a classroom and you can spot kids who are a little bit more active than the other kids. They're a little bit defiant with the teachers, a little bit naughty, some stuff happens, and then you put them in front of a screen and plop, they freeze. I've taught many, many, many children like this. They are used to the stimulation of the screen. When you take that stimulation away, they're getting it some other way. And when you're showing them something like a book or like a sound or like a math problem, that thing has no chance of matching the energy of the screen. This is part of why we say, okay, screens before the age of 2 are not super helpful. It's giving our kid a little bit too much input and the wrong kind of input. And when you put that kid in a learning situation, it is much often harder for them. And you can be like, Spence, that's harsh. It's harsh, but is it wrong? Because I've worked with hundreds, now thousands of families, and I found one consistent pattern. Kids who spend a lot of time on screens, whether educational or otherwise, they struggle with the transition outside of those screens. And the parent says, okay, I'm ready to teach my kid how to read. I'm ready to teach them how to do math. I want to do this learning time with them, but they won't listen. They won't follow directions. They won't sit still. You got to think about it. They're sitting still with that screen. They're not sitting still with you. There might be a connection, okay? Another challenge you might face if you have a child who's used to a ton of screen time and you're trying to transition them like off of those screens towards like a more formal learning block is you might have the challenge of like, you think they know it or they think they know it or they think they've done it before because they've seen these different like things pop up on the screen or because they sung a song. And then you realize in the actual teaching, they don't know the thing that you thought and that they thought they knew. And there's some frustration that comes with this too. There's frustration with thinking that you know all of your letters and that you know all the sounds, and then you realize, we just memorized a song. So we've got to be aware of the behavior. We've got to be aware of the focus with any screen time, including educational screen time. And we've got to be aware of the impact it has on the actual learning, which oftentimes is they didn't learn as much as we thought. If you're the parent at home and you're watching, in your head, I want you to picture kind of like a pros and cons column, okay? Pros and cons. I'm not going to put one on the screen because it's going to be different for every family. And you go to screen time and you're like, what are the pros? Well, the pros are, it's going to give you some initial exposure to a topic. If it's educational screen time, it's going to be better than something else that they're watching, which might be giving them the wrong kinds of inputs, right? At least they're going to be getting exposure to something that matters. And it might be giving you as the parent or caretaker some time to relax, to refresh, to recharge, right? Some different pros, okay? I'm not going to put learning in that category because I do not believe educational screen time is amazing for learning. Then you go and you're like, what are the cons? The cons you may not see initially, but some potential cons are like focus, attention, behavior. Another con is like the learning. The learning might have been done in a way that is not the best instructionally, and that might be tough for you to deal with. And finally, you're going to deal with the difference between the screen and a book. And you are going to have to work a little bit harder to get your kid to focus on a book that doesn't move than a parent will who has not been showing their kids screens, who's only been showing their kids books. It's going to be easier for that kid who's only seen books to transition to books, okay? And that's just common sense. So there are pros to screen time. There are cons to screen time, and it's going to depend on your family and on your situation. And if you're still unsure what to do, and if you're with me, I have a very, very, very simple formula for deciding, should you give your kid this educational screen time, okay? Should you do it? Here's the easiest way to decide. You got to be honest with yourself. It's easy if you're honest, if you're telling yourself the truth. And the easy thing to do, you look at your kid, take a hard look, and You say to yourself, is this child growing into who I want them to be? Look at their behavior, look at their emotional skills, look at their social skills, look at their academic skills, look at how they talk and how they communicate, look at their motor skills. Look at your child and say, are they developing into the person I want them to be? When they were born, you had some sort of vision about their life. You wanted them to be kind, or you wanted them to be loving, or you wanted them to be smart, or you wanted them to be social, right? You wanted them to be funny. There's something you wanted for them. Are they on that path? And if you look at your child and you're like, my kid's on that path, you got your answer. Keep doing whatever you're doing now. If your kid is on that path of who you want them to be, they are crushing it, and you're giving them 10 hours of screen time a day, then no one can tell you anything. Keep doing what you're doing, okay? Because you're clearly fulfilling the mission that you had with your kid. Your kid's here, you want them here, they're on that path. But if you look at your kid, take an honest look at them, and you say, you know what? I wanted my child to be social. I wanted them to be happy. I wanted them to love and appreciate their family. But we cannot go to a restaurant and have a conversation without a screen in their hands. You might want to think about it. You say, I want them to love books. I want them to enjoy being able to sit down and read a book with me, to enjoy getting lost in a story. But you put the book in their hand and they hit it out and they grab for their screen. You might want to reconsider. That might be too much, right? It's not my place or any other parent's place to tell you what is the right amount of screen time or what's the type of screen time for your kid. But if you're watching this video and you're like, do I give them more educational screen time? Do I give them less? Do I play them YouTube Kids? Do I play them PBS Kids? You've got to look at the outcome on your kid and the behavior that they show to determine what the input is that you have. You got to look at how is the kid acting when I give them this YouTube Kids, what's the impact? When I give them PBS Kids, what's the impact? When I give them ABC Mouse, what's the impact? Are they still growing and developing into the child I want them to be? If so, you are golden, keep it up. If not, you might want to reconsider and scale back. And I know that can be scary for a lot of people. I've had people reach out to me and say, how do I pull them off the screens? Hint, you just take it away. You're the parent, you get to do what you want. But you have to look at the actual outcomes. Don't look at screen time as a number of minutes. Look at screen time as what is your child showing you, and is that what you want to see? Okay? I'm happy to help support in the comments. If you have more specific questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, the short version of this, there are pros, there are cons. Generally, these educational apps and programs are not as good as you think. Your kid is not learning on them. They're watching them, they're not learning on them. But you've got to make that decision, weigh it out for your family based on what makes the most sense and based on who your child is now and who you want them to be. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this was honest. And until next time, I will talk to you soon.